Good morning and welcome to another interesting match in preliminary round 2 of the public sector debate competition. We're so glad you could join us. I'm Aniki Clark, communication lead here in the Transformation Implementation Unit. Things got off to a very nail-biting start this morning for us in this room, and I'm sure things are equally exciting in the adjacent room. Some teams have already cemented their places in the octafinals, and we are hoping that we will have an equally exciting match between these two teams this morning. And we have with us in team proposition the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. Let me catch up with the name change. Ministry of Economic Growth and Infrastructure Development. Thank you, ladies. And the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. No name change there. And they will be debating the moot, be it resolved that regulating corporations is more effective than encouraging consumers to avoid companies with harmful environmental practices. Oh, okay. All right, they are equally skilled, I'm sure, at this topic, right? And we look forward to the arguments. So let's get to meet them, starting with team proposition.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Danielle Osborne, and I'm first speaker for team proposition.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Shireen Sims Landell. I'm the second speaker.
Good morning. That would make me the third speaker. I am Andrea Jones.
Thank you very much, team proposition. Give them a round of applause, huh? They need that little encouragement to get them warmed and relaxed, to take the podium confidently. So let's now hear it for Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. Team, introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. I am Siobhan Miller, first speaker.
Good morning. I am Deshanelle Douglas, and I'm the second speaker.
Good morning. My name is Carrie Ann DeVos, and of course, I'm the third speaker.
Good, good. Let's give them a round of applause. So the teams are no longer strangers to us, and I'm sure judges are no longer strangers to you. They've been around since the start of this competition, but let's have the introduction from our panel of adjudicators, starting with Jermaine, who is the chair adjudicator for the Jamaican Association for Debating and Empowerment. Jermaine.
Thank you very much, Aniki. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jermaine, as Aniki just mentioned, and I'll be the chair adjudicator for this match. Looking forward to a scintillating exchange of ideas and arguments generally.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Roshana Jarrett, and I'll be serving as one of your wing adjudicators this morning.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lacardi Egan Nelson, and I also share the sentiments with my chair. All the best to both teams.
Okay, judges, properly introduced, teams, no longer strangers. I now hand over to Jermaine, who will marshal the match. All that's left for me to say is good luck, teams. I know you will put your best foot forward.
Thanks again, Aniki. All right, so we are about ready to get our match started, but just before we get started, to your viewing audience, we know you might be unfamiliar with the flow of things here, so I'll just go through describing briefly the rules of this contest. So each debater has a different amount of time within which they will present. The first speaker on each team will present within 7 minutes. The second speaker presents within 6 minutes. And the third and final speaker presents within 5 minutes. After the first pair of speeches have been delivered, we will enter a period of cross-examination. We'll enter another period of cross-examination between both teams after the second pair of speakers have delivered their presentation. Thereafter, we will pause for 1 minute, after which we will have the reply speakers, beginning with that from opposition. The debate concludes thereafter with the proposition reply speech. All right? Debaters, please be mindful of the time signals. You will get a signal when you've spoken for 1 minute, and the signal sounds like, there you go. Then you'll hear another such ding of the bell to indicate that you have 1 minute remaining in your speech. When you have completed the allotted time, you will hear 2 dings of the bell, and then 15 seconds thereafter you'll hear continuous dinging of the bell, which signals that you should exit the lectern and allow the debate to continue. All right? Do you have any questions, team? Are we ready? Yes. All right, we are ready. So we are ready as well from the panel. And so let us now call upon the first speaker from Team Proposition to open this debate. Of course, Team Proposition is representing the Ministry of Economic Growth and Infrastructure Development. Hear, hear.
Esteemed adjudicators, opponents, members of the audience, good morning. The motion before us today reads, be it resolved that regulating corporations is more effective than encouraging consumers to avoid companies with harmful environmental practices. As first speaker for the opposition, I will define the key terms and demonstrate why government regulation is the more effective tool for environmental protection. My second speaker will then expand our arguments, providing further evidence as well as rebutting the opposition's claims. And my third speaker will reinforce why this motion must stand. But before proceeding, let us define the key terms. The Oxford English Dictionary defines regulation as a rule prescribed for the management of some matter, or for the regulating of conduct, a governing precept or direction, a standing rule. In essence, regulation establishes enforceable standards that guide behavior and ensure compliance. Encouraging consumers to avoid companies refers to persuading individuals to boycott or stop supporting businesses. Harmful environmental practices refer to actions that pollute the environment, destroy ecosystems, contribute to climate change, or damage natural resources and public health. Mr. Speaker, if we are truly serious about protecting the environment, then we must be honest about where real power lies. And it's not in encouraging consumers to avoid companies, but it is instead in the regulation of said companies. Companies operate on a massive scale. They control production, packaging, carbon emissions, resource extraction, and individual waste. Their decisions shape economies, communities, and ecosystems. Because of that immense power, environmental protection cannot rely on goodwill alone. It requires laws, enforcement, and consequences. While the proposition supports consumer awareness and responsible purchasing, we firmly maintain that government regulation is far more effective because it creates change that is mandatory, enforceable, and consistently applied across entire industries and nations. Just a minute. Mr. Speaker, consumer pressure tends to only affect companies with a public image, the visible brands, the trendy fashion brands, the electronic giants, and the global fast food chains. But many of the world's most environmentally destructive industries operate far from public attention. The mining industry, the shipping industry, the chemical manufacturing and heavy industries. Consumers may never even see the environmental damage being done. That is why environmental protection cannot depend on whether a company is boycottable. Pollution should not continue simply because the average consumer cannot see it, track it, trend it on social media. Regulation closes that gap. Unlike boycotts accepted.
So, since regulations are effective, as you're saying, what are the strategies to address the regulations, such as like the 1956 Beaches Act that is currently outdated?
Thank you very much for your question. I will answer that later on in my presentation. Unlike boycotts, regulation reaches every company and not just famous ones. It creates rules that all companies must follow, regardless of whether the public is paying attention. Mr. Speaker, quite frankly, many companies have mastered the art of waiting out public outrage. Today they are cancelled, tomorrow the internet finds a new scandal. Boycotts fade, hashtags expire, and public attention moves on. But regulation, Mr. Speaker, regulation does not clock out when TikTok stops talking. The law does not disappear simply because Twitter gets distracted. It follows, regulations follow companies to their boardrooms, into their factories, and into their bank accounts. Companies do not suddenly become environmentally conscious out of kindness. They respond to pressure, and nothing creates pressure faster than fines, lawsuits, orders to shut down or temporarily halt operations, and mandatory compliance. The truth is, a hashtag may embarrass a company for a week. Legislation can change its behavior for decades. Where companies can scroll past angry comments, they certainly cannot scroll past the law. Here in Jamaica, companies simply cannot operate on goodwill. They must obtain permits and approval from government agencies, such as the National Environment and Planning Agency, the Natural Resources Conservation Authority, the Water Resources Authority, and the Public Health Authorities. That is not optional. That is enforced compliance. Without regulations, forests could be stripped bare, rivers polluted, ecosystem damaged, and communities left to bear consequences. The government does not gamble with environmental protection by merely hoping companies do the right thing. It legislates, enforces, and penalizes because environmental harm is not private inconvenience, but it rather is a national crisis. One of Jamaica's clearest examples of effective regulation is the ban on single-use plastics and polystyrene containers. Accepted?
So, can you guarantee then that every Jamaican government will strongly enforce environmental regulations?
The purpose of the government is to establish regulations, protect the environment, protect its citizens, so it has a right. We have a right to ensure that laws are enforced that protect the environment. One of Jamaica's clearest examples of effective regulation is the ban on single-use plastic and polystyrene containers. For years, citizens were encouraged to voluntarily reduce plastic use. We heard slogans such as bring your own bags or say no to plastics. Yet, despite awareness campaigns, plastic waste continued to block drains, pollute gullies, worsen flooding, and damage marine ecosystems. So what finally made the difference? The government intervened and regulated the problem. Plastic bags, styrofoam containers, and several single-use plastic products were banned. Businesses were required to comply. Supermarkets changed packaging, and restaurants switched to alternatives. And my opponents, the results were visible. The Jamaican Environment Trust reported cleanup data showing approximately 30% reduction in single-use plastics collected along the Palisades coastline after the ban was introduced. That, Mr. Speaker, is the power of regulation. Regulation does not politely ask corporations to change. It compels them to change. Ultimately, the opposition's entire approach depends on hope. Hope that corporations will place ethics above profit. Hope that every consumer has the time, the money, and the information necessary to hold corporations accountable. But hope alone cannot protect the environment. At the heart of this debate lies one simple question. If environmental preservation is the goal, which method produced the greatest and fastest results, regulation or consumer avoidance? The answer is clear: regulations. Thank you.
We thank the first proposition speaker from MEG ID for presenting their speech. We now call upon the first speaker from the opposition team, the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce, to open the opposition's case. Here.
Most Honorable Chair, distinguished judges, worthy opponents, good morning. What proposition has offered this House is a comforting fantasy. They want us to believe that once government creates environmental regulations, corporations suddenly become environmentally responsible. But Jamaica and indeed the wider world has already tested that theory, and the evidence is clear. Regulation alone does not guarantee environmental accountability. And you stated that only the government has legal authority to punish companies. And let me inform you, legal authority means little without timely enforcement. Consumer pressure, however, creates immediate economic punishment, while government often remain trapped in bureaucracy and delays. And that is why our position is simple. Corporations fear losing consumers far more than they fear losing court cases. Honorable judges, effectiveness is not measured by how impressive legislation sounds on paper. Effectiveness is measured by whether corporate behavior actually changes in practice to reduce negative environmental impact. And behavioral changes happen fastest when consumers directly threaten a company's profits, reputation, and market survival. Encouraging consumers refers to educating and mobilizing the public to avoid habitual offending companies through public advocacy, sustainability campaigns, eco-labelings, social media activism, boycott, and transparency system that influence in purchasing behavior. Because every dollar spent is an endorsement and every dollar withheld is punishment. As first speaker, I will outline why consumer pressure is more effective for environmental accountability. My deputy will reinforce the impact, and our third speaker will conclude the case. Side government continues to confuse the existence of legislation with the existence of effective enforcement and accountability. Jamaica already possesses environmental laws and regulatory agencies under NEPA and NRCA, yet environmental harm still repeatedly occur. In the Rio Cobre pollution incident involving Windalco, environmental regulations governing wastewater disposal already existed, yet contamination still entered waterways and affected surrounding communities before enforcement mechanism fully responded. We are in 2026. This took place in 2019. That is your effective regulation working? Not at this time. Furthermore, in Portland, illegal sand mining along the Rio Grande River gained national urgency only after videos and public outrage circulated online. Think carefully about that, judges. Public pressure accelerated action, not routine bureaucracy. The proposition model, not at this time, proposition model is weak. Regulation often reacts after environmental harm occurs, while consumer pressure creates immediate economic consequences before corporations can comfortably continue harmful behavior. And that is why I expected your first speaker to mention 3 situations where regulation enforcement took place prior to public outcry, and governments move through investigations, report, consultations, hearings, and enforcement procedures. Corporations know this. Large companies often possess lawyers, lobbyists, financial resources, and procedural advantages that allow them to delay accountability for years. But the market does not wait on tribunals. The moment consumers begin withdrawing support, corporations respond immediately, because falling profits, damaged public image, and declining investor confidence threaten business survival in real time. And we can see this in the Consumer Affairs Commission's 2024 Ethical Relations Study, where more than 74% of consumers are willing to avoid unethical companies. You may go ahead.
I would like to find out, thank you, where in Jamaica have you demonstrated, where in your argument are you going to demonstrate how consumer pressure would have caused the regulations to be ineffective?
Thank you for that, and I do continue. Even in Jamaica, businesses respond rapidly whenever public backlash threatens their image. We have seen companies issue public statements, listen carefully now, apologies and corrective action within hours of social media outrage. For example, the 2016 Lascaux tweets against a Jamaican Olympian, because companies understand one thing clearly: public perception affects profits. Not at this time. That is a central truth proposition cannot escape. Corporations are more responsive to market punishment than moral regulation that have been relegated to moral instruction. Moreover, consumer encouragement creates continuous accountability rather than occasional supervision. Government inspections happen periodically, audits occasionally, enforcement reviews maybe months later, but consumers interact with businesses every single day. Every purchase becomes scrutiny. Every review becomes oversight. Every boycott becomes enforcement. That creates constant pressure that corporations cannot easily avoid. And since your first speaker missed it in our point of information, regulations are often outdated and encourages minimum compliance rather than genuine environmental transformation. Not at this time. Corporations do not ask themselves, how do we best protect the environment? They ask, what is the minimum required to avoid penalties? Imagine a company earning 4.7 billion annually, being fined 10,000 Jamaican dollars for plastic distribution, as your first speaker said, is a fine. That is 0.000021% of its revenue. Honorable judges, that is not deterrence. That is petty cash. You are encouraging technical compliance, not meaningful sustainability. A company may satisfy your legal thresholds while sacrificing the environment for profits. Some corporations simply absorb these fines as another operational expense. Consumer pressure, however, pushes corporations beyond legal minimums because companies must compete for public trust, customer loyalty, and brand credibility. Sustainability becomes not just a legal obligation, but a business necessity. And most honorable chair, our opponents are defending a system that is reactive, delayed, and dependent on bureaucratic enforcement. Our approach directly targets what corporations value most: their profits, their reputation, and their survival in the marketplace. We proudly stand in opposition. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech opening opposition's case. We now move to the first segment of cross-examination. In this segment, the opposition team, MIIC, will get a chance first to ask 3 questions of Team Meg ID. MIIC, you may propose your questions. Just note that your questions are limited each to 10 seconds. The response coming to us from Meg ID are limited to 45 seconds. Here.
Can you explain how regulation prevents environmental harm before investigations, hearings, and legal processes are complete?
Definitely. Regulations are not dependent on pollution incidents. Regulations actually allow the companies to put measures in place to avoid pollution from happening. So it's a part of environmental principles, which there are several. Pollution prevention is a major one, and that is a significant role of legislation. Enforcement comes in after the incident happens.
So if corporations can delay enforcement through appeals and legal procedures, so where exactly is the immediate accountability that will come with these regulations?
And that question actually answers itself, because a part of the process is going to court, a part of the process is appealing. That is all an entire part of the whole regulations functions. You've identified a fault, there are systems in place, there's environmental justice. So it's not just about going in and say, hey, you did this, let me charge you. There are systems in place to assess accountability and as well to find the better consequences to the actions.
Thank you. Regulations are often left up to interpretation. How can you make the language simpler for the common man and remove ambiguity for no misinterpretations?
Regulations are far from being ambiguous. The whole point of having legal regulations is to have legal certainty, which is a guarantee of what is wrong, what is right, and how it is to be addressed. So my opponents, I'm not sure which regulations you have been reading. And in fact, if regulations are still valid, there is no need for it to be amended, despite the age.
Thank you very much for this phase of cross-examination. We now call upon the proposition team to pose your 3 questions to the opposition team.
Opposition, without regulations, what prevents companies from ignoring the environmental concerns of harmful practices, which are cheaper and more efficient, as you would put it, in producing products for persons?
Could you repeat, please?
Without the regulations, what do you propose would prevent companies from ignoring the environmental concerns that contribute to harmful practices and produce cheaper products for the so-called market that you're speaking about, market pressure?
Okay, so what we're debating today is the effectiveness of regulation or consumer encouragement. And our position is that consumer encouragement is the effective model, as your regulations often depend on the consumer outcry before your enforcement mechanisms take place. And your regulations have yet to be effective timely because you have outdated laws that have been more than 70 years and you're waiting until 2026 to address them. What we are saying is that is ineffective for the Jamaican people, and our method bring forth the better impact for the company as it affects their profits, and that will create the change that the companies should do.
How, I know you mentioned, in your first speaker mentioned public outrage and a company issuing public apology. How can consumer pressure ensure long-term compliance once public attention fades?
Thank you for that. Public attention never fades. It actually lasts longer than your legislative proceedings because you have matters in court to this day and the public is still following up those cases. And we are the ones that actually drive you to take action prior to your enforcement mechanism coming in.
And corporations care about branding. That is why they spend millions of dollars in PR and marketing strategies to ensure that their name isn't sullied or soiled. So by avoiding these companies, we were hitting them where it hurts, their name.
Okay. My question, it's twofold. Who protects communities when the polluters are invisible to the consumers? Because you did mention PR campaign, but what if the polluters are invisible?
So, for example, you would have known that regulation and the right of the consumer is the right to be informed, which you should have done, the right to be protected from harmful practices, which you should have done, the right to make a choice, which we are promoting, and the right to actually make a decision. And that is why you have the Dry Harbor case where 8 community residents would have actually used their voice and partnered with JET to actually bring forth change before the Bengal mining company would have continued engage in mining, and cause potential harm to their community.
All right, thank you. Thank you to both teams for what is a very informative period of cross-examination. We continue now with the presentation from the second speaker from Team Proposition, Meg ID. Here.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, my colleague has laid out the case as to why regulation is more effective than consumer avoidance. Before I get into my argument, let me address something that my opposition had mentioned. Being old does not mean that it is inadequate. But let me further extend our case too by proving that regulation is more certain, scalable, and the fairest tool globally and in Jamaica to protect the environment. In 2022, the world generated 136.6 billion pounds of e-waste, yet only 22% was properly recycled. Companies like Apple and Adidas have made admirable sustainable commitments, from using recycled aluminum, renewable energy, to reducing polyester waste and ocean plastic. Previously, MacBooks were manufacturing and using aluminum that was mined, which was a significant source of pollution. Today, Apple is using 100% recycled aluminum. This, Mr. Chairman, was as a result of regulatory pressure, not due to consumer boycott. Such progress was not solely dependent on corporate goodwill. public relations and market pressure
Point of
because
information.
not entertained, because this alone cannot guarantee environmental justice for future generation. Without regulation, there is no guarantee of compliance. Let me delve further. Regulation beats greenwashing because it replaces marketing with proof. Consumer avoidance assumes people can identify which company is harmful. Consumers cannot inspect supply chains, measure the quality of the water, or to even confirm whether a development will damage the wetlands or the reef. This is why Jamaica requires environmental impact assessment, permitting companies not entertained. Permitting companies must provide evidence. Regulators can demand mitigation. We saw this with NEPA, with the fish kill in Bagwalk. The courts can intervene when standards are breached. Regulation turns, trust me, we are eco-friendly, to prove it. My second point, regulation creates a level playing field and drives real change across an industry. Mr. Speaker, without regulation, the responsible businesses are not punished. If, for example, one company spends money on cleaner technology, but their competitors freely pollute, the polluter will win on price. And consumers, especially not entertained, when they are under economic pressure, will often buy the cheaper options. All importers must follow bans. All developers must meet EIA requirements, and all industrial operators must follow the rules. Mr. Speaker, this makes environmental protection the baseline and not a branding strategy. Mr. Speaker, let me add some more context. Regulation is scalable. Regulation changes whole industry. Consumer action only changes some shopping decisions. Regulation is certain. Regulation is enforceable. Consumer action is voluntary.
Point of information.
Regulation provides justice. Regulation protects communities that are not consumers of polluting industry. Regulation is durable. Regulation laws persist beyond news cycles and trends. The ultimate goal of the government is environmental protection as provided in the Jamaican Constitution. Mr. Speaker, this debate comes down to one simple question. Do we protect Jamaica's environment with optional choices or enforceable rules? Consumer avoidance asks ordinary Jamaicans to carry the burden of corporate pollution. Many people cannot afford not entertained. Many people cannot afford premium choices. Therefore, the environment cannot depend on the corporation who creates the harm. Mr. Speaker, regulation is backed by permits, standard, penalties, and the courts. My opposition had mentioned a few points. The opposition said that consumers move faster. Speed is not effective. Regulation may be slower to pass, but my friends, once it is in place, it is nationwide and mandatory. Another argument from my opposition, consumer pressure hits profits and reputation. Mr. Speaker, this only works when the consumers can clearly identify the culprit and they can afford to switch. For these reasons and those that my highly esteemed colleagues have outlined, and will continue to do so, to support the move that regulating corporation is more effective than encouraging consumers to avoid companies with harmful environmental practice. I rest my case.
We thank you very much, second speaker from the proposition team, and now call upon the second speaker from the opposition team to advance opposition's case. Hear, hear.
adjudicators, opponents, audience, good day. Our opponent is saying that consumers cannot afford environmentally friendly alternatives, but our case is not limited to purchasing power alone. Public exposure, along with online advocacy and reviews and reputational pressure, cause consumer little but still heavily influence corporate behavior. So when the opponents are saying that consumer cannot afford environmentally friendly product, that is shame on the government. Why is it not in place that all consumers can afford all environmentally safe products? Now let's go into my point. This creates a vulnerability because governments are politically influenced and vulnerable to lobbying regulations. We have seen this because corporations could truly ignore consumers. They would not spend billions on branding, PR, and reputation management. Businesses clearly understand the public perception and that it directly affects their profitability. Contrary to this, the corporations face certain layoffs and reduce investment and they relocation of their operations. So in true UN's resolution style, they veto anything that hurts their bottom line. So while the proposition waits for an under-equipped government inspector to verify a green claim, the corporation has already lobbied for a carve-out. We have seen this with the ExxonMobil and other fossil fuel corporations that have lobbied the government for decades globally on climate-related policies. So unlike, not right now. So they are killing off the environment as well as the major tobacco companies who delayed anti-smoking campaigns. So regulation creates a standard that, national regulation creates a standard that means little if enforcement is weak or inconsistent. However, the consumer pressure operates daily and continuously across every transaction and public interaction. Plus, corporations are in the room with the drafting of this legislation. So why, not right now, why should we trust a system where the fox is helping to build the hen's house? Let's look at the Goat Island example. It wasn't the regulators that saved the sanctuary from the buck of the people's demonstration that forced the government to scrap the deal. Let's also look at how the Bud Light 2023 case that they reported over 40 decline in sales due to the market pressure. So when the opponents are talking about revenues and consumers, let it be known that revenues determine survival and consumer threatens their profit. So when they talk about only the governments have the legal authority to punish the companies, let it be known that legal authority means little without timely enforcement. Consumer pressure creates immediate economic punishment while government often remain trapped in bureaucracy. Now, regulation stops at the ports, however, consumer activism followed the revenue across the globe, reaching the most untouchable monopolies. And my opponents have brought this up about the mining, but let it be known, a very important correction, the law was only passed after the global demonstration from the Democratic Republic of Congo, causing Apple to commit 100% in recycled cobalt in all Apple design by 2025. We have also seen this case with asbestos. This triggered the domino effect in Jamaica that saved our police officers and firefighters who were put in the line to serve, not right now, and protect, but yet still we were killing them off in the offices for centuries. Monopolies like the De Beers who were faceless, but they were big giants in the diamond industry, have been brought to their knees by consumers that have chosen to go with lab-grown diamonds instead of the blood diamond, and thank you for that movie. So this model, the businesses are creating a model that to appease the consumer, not to satisfy the government's legislation. Not right now. We talk about the habitual offenders, and you brought up the river, but let's be known. If the fines and the legislation were so effective, why are they still polluting the river? We can't have no fish for Easter. So when they talk about the NEPA and their fine, what is a $20,000 or $10,000 or even a measly $8,000 fine in this context to $1 billion worth corporation? Tell me now, opponents, which CEO you know run off time on the block? You never see a CEO go prison for these crimes, so this is not a deterrent, it is a pollution tax. So why they continue to destroy the environment, and who pays the real bill? We do. The big, beautiful bill. Finish? Oh, according to the CSC, 56% of Jamaica consumers believe that companies with strong environmental records should be celebrated. And this can be shown with the Ritz-Carlton Masaya Mara backlash in Kenya, that it damaged more in their product than any courtroom fine. So the consumer pressure the behavioral change model. So this is why Starbucks and Disney had to conform after the viral video of the turtle being strangled by the plastic in the ocean. I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you for that big, beautiful speech. Ladies and gentlemen, we come to the point where we enter the second segment of cross-examination. At this time, the proposition team will get a chance first to ask questions, 3 questions of the opposition team. Team proposition, you may proceed.
Thank you, opposition. You've made several declarations, and yet I'm not hearing how consumer pressure has, in Jamaican context, been effective over regulations. The examples you use prove regulations.
Thank you for that question, my opponent. Let it be known that corporations value consumers' voices. And then look at the recent billboard sign, yeah? The corporation will face so many backlash that they distance themselves from ever approving that sign, as well as the KSMAC. So this also further proves our point that there's loopholes in the legislation. And if it's not the KSMAC that approved the billboard, it's who decides to put the sign up there.
I think we need to remind the opposition of the mood regarding companies with harmful environmental practices. So I'm yet to hear an example related to harmful environmental practices. Yeah, I'm asked, that's the question. Can you give us an example with respect to harmful environmental practices in Jamaica?
Well, in my first speech, I would have highlighted the Windalpa case with the pollution of the Rio Cobre, and that, might I remind you, only got attention after the public had brought it national focus. And in addition to that, the illegal sand mining of the Rio Grande River would have been a situation that got national focus after the community members would have raised it on the social media. And and the Dry Harbor Mountain case. So we have actually listed 3.
What about industries that are far from public attention? How would those companies be regulated? You say public profits are hit, but what about the companies that don't have, that you can't see?
My opponents, I have clearly stated the monopolies. I've talked about the mining industry in Africa and how that DRC could get away from that catastrophic thing because of the consumer activism. I've also talked about how Apple, that directly can support the consumer support, where they had to confine to the consumer, even though the mining industry is not affected by the consumer.
And may I add, in addition to the monopolies not being affected, please be reminded that these corporations value investors and their opinion, and the consumer perception of these companies have the capability to actually target and change investor confidence.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much for that segment or that phase of cross-examination. We now invite the opposition team now to pose their 3 questions to team proposition.
So you're saying that regulations are more effective. So let me ask you, give me an example of when regulations had a company in Jamaica rethink what they're doing in terms of the environment?
Thank you for that question. We have several examples, and I'll even use the wastewater regulations that we have, which prevents environmental discharge into our rivers and into our environment. I can go even further in respect of how we have phased out leaded gasoline. I can go even further, where under NEPA's legislation, we have phased out the use of CFCs in industries and their manufacturing processes. I can go even further to tell you that the Public Health Act, the NRCA Act, and the WRA Act are still in effect, and they are still regulating companies.
All right, thank you for that. So on the matter of effectiveness of your regulation, and you mentioned the wastewater management, which do corporations respond faster to, falling profits or future investigations?
Clearly, falling profits is not a question because the demonstration that the examples you have used did not affect profit. Their profits were affected after legislation came in place, after they were brought in court, after it was brought to the fore. The consumer highlighting the events in the public does not mean that the regulators were not at the fore. They were already there. They were already having discussions. There were already stop notices issued. You came in after the fact. The regulations were already in play, and the regulators were already acting. You just made it public. So regulators do not have to act in the public for our best interest.
All right, thank you for that. And lastly, what strategies will be implemented to reinstate environmental regulations you have defended in instances when the minister's discretion can be used to overrule?
Well, our Constitution provides for 3 separate bodies. There is the judiciary, which has done its job, the executive and the legislative. We all work together in tandem to ensure environmental justice, and the case that you are referring to does prove environmental justice is alive, regulations are alive, and the environment is the overall objective in terms of preserving it for our future. And that's what the case has ruled on.
All right, thank you for that segment of cross-examination. Yes, a round of applause. All right, so we'll take a 1-minute pause now, after which we'll resume with the reply speakers from either team, beginning with that from the opposition side. Teams, your 1-minute pause begins now. Good. That signals the end of your pause. We now invite the reply speaker, the third and final speaker from Team MIIC, the opposition. Hear, hear.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Team Proposition wants us to believe that outdated laws are just as effective from 1956 as it will be in 2026. But my opponents, the conditions of 1956 and 2060 are significantly different. You expect us to believe that the same laws of yesterday can work for today? If that is the case, then no laws would have been amended. You are living in la la land, my opponents. The reality is that regulations does not magically equate to effectiveness. Not when they are reactive, slow, weakly enforced, and often powerless against corporations with deep pockets. Empowering consumers to avoid these environmentally harmful companies is faster, stronger, and far more effective. Now let me demolish this idea that regulations are these perfect shields that will protect the environment from these companies. They only work when the government acts quickly and enforces consistently. But how often does that really happen? Time and time again, we witness governments drag their feet while corporations continue to murder our planet, pollute rivers, poison communities, and destroy ecosystems for profit. The poor regulatory agencies themselves can't even keep up. Hours spent on rigorous analytical work and strong evidentiary support to make their decisions wasted, as their decisions can then be superseded by the exercise of ministerial discretion. Cries of limited funding and understaffing leads to a heavy reliance on the very same consumers to speak out against these companies, proving that enforcement often occurs, as my first speaker said, after public outrage. My second speaker would have also lamented the ecosystem, coral reefs, mangroves, fish sanctuaries of Goat Island would be non-existent if the public hadn't said, hold on, draw brakes, wheel and come again. And we must still believe that these regulations are more effective than people power. You say that consumers will not be able to identify when companies are harming the environment, but you do not need a PhD to see that the air is dirty or that the fishes are dying, my opponents. You talk about accountability, but what accountability exists when corporations can simply absorb fines as business expenses? How do you justify allowing a multi-million-dollar company to pay a fine of $10,000? $10,000? Not even minimum wage? That is not accountability. That is a joke. Real change is driven by the people, and it only takes a spark. One viral campaign, one organized boycott, one shift to competitors hits them where it hurts most, their profits. Why? Because these companies are in the business of making money. Money is the motivation. Take it away and see how quickly they transform like Optimus Prime. It's either change or risk collapse. My teammates have said it. Even tech giants like Apple, as you even mentioned, had to improve environmental policies because the consumers demanded it. Environmental activism extends borders. You are not alone if you did not know who iShowSpeed was, but consider the reach. Can you imagine a platform such as that was used to advocate for environmental reform? These corporations would be quivering in their boots. In today's digital age, social media and online activism exposes these companies faster than any bureaucratic investigations ever could. And to be very clear, we are not saying that regulations are bad. There are just too many problematic circumstances to classify them as more effective, like being susceptible to the influence of the very corporations they're supposed to regulate, wealthy companies lobbying politicians, financing campaigns, greasing a palm here and there, and shaping policies in their favor. The result? Weak regulations that do little to stop environmental destruction. Mother Earth is crying, my opponents, right? She cannot wait on paperwork, committees, delayed enforcement, long court proceedings, ridiculous fines, and the bare minimum of accountability. Enough is enough. Team Opposition rests.
We thank you for your presentation, third speaker on the opposition, and thank the opposition team overall. At this time, we call upon the third speaker from the proposition team to conclude the team's case and the debate overall. Hear, hear.
Thank you. Enough is indeed enough. Jamaica, the land of wood and water, we will always be. So a regulation developed in 1956 to protect the beaches is still valid because we still have beaches. The Forest Act developed to protect the forest is still valid because we still have forest. Mr. Speaker, my opponents, the debate has never been about whether consumers have a role to play. Of course they do. The real question is, what is the most effective way to protect our environment? And the answer is clear. Systemic environmental protection requires enforceable rules, not voluntary morality. When governments regulate corporations, compliance becomes mandatory, not optional. Regulations are universal, non-prejudicial, and they don't come into play at the end when a pollution incident occurs. They capture pollution prevention mechanisms. They capture steps, standards, mitigation, etc. The regulations are not designed to only target bad apples. You keep referring to Apple. More than apples. They establish standards that every corporation must follow and must follow equally. And when a company violates those standards, that's when the consequences chip in. Consequences, penalties, fines, even court procedures are far more expensive than public outcry and a simple boycott. A boycott may damage one's company's reputation for a short time. But the thing is, environmental crises require immediate, coordinated, and even long-term action, constant regulation, constant watches. Without regulation, corporations that prioritize profit over sustainability can outcompete the responsible businesses. Without regulation, there is no guarantee of compliance. The opposition would have you believe that consumer pressure prevents harmful behavior by making sustainability economically beneficial. And that is not true. After all, this is not the sugar ban, where we rely on persons to make their personal decisions. We're speaking about the environment, and it is quite unfair for consumers to carry the burden of protecting the environment. They are not fully informed in some instances about the global complex supply chains behind products that they buy, and they're not even financially empowered to choose the ethical options. Can you imagine a parent struggling to buy groceries, having to investigate the environmental footprints of the products that they are supporting? Environmental protection cannot be dependent on the public outcry. Such a position cannot be entertained, my opponents. And, you know, there is a global cry out there with respect to environment, and both teams would have alluded to that. And we have seen in 2022, where a resolution was passed by the United Nations General Assembly, that everyone on the planet has a right to a healthy environment. And it noted that the environmental degradation is taking place at a rapid instant, and it called for government to enforce these and guarantee clean air, clean and healthy sustainable environment through legislation, not through consumer movement. This is why regulation matters, and it's exactly why it's proven to be more effective. The bottom line, Mr. Speaker, my opponents, is that a healthy environment is not an option. It is an inalienable right for all human beings, and it is the duty of government to ensure that such right is enforceable through environmental protection rules. And of course, the Jamaican Constitution reinforces that, and it came out in the recent case, the Bengal case with the mining. You have the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which was enacted in 2011, and explicitly protects the right of the healthy environment. It says every Jamaican citizen is to enjoy a healthy, productive environment free from threat of injury, damage, or environmental abuse. And it puts the position on the government in order to enforce and protect current generation and future generation through legislative matters. My previous speakers would have highlighted the regulations, certain regulations, and my opponents' regulations are not standard. There is the ability for them to be amended to meet current and future needs. There's no political indecisiveness, as you have pointed out to, and talking about greasing of the palm. Right now, the administration has a ministry designated for water, land, environment, and climate change. Prior to that, in the PNP administration, our former Prime Minister would have pledged Jamaica's commitment in terms of environmental amendments of legislation to meet the future needs and the present needs. From the Dry Harbor Mountains to the Blue and Jonker Mountains, taking it through the 26 watersheds of Jamaica down into Kingston Harbor, Jamaica faces real challenges in respect of balancing development and conservation. We cannot leave that burden to the consumers. All of us deserve more than hope that the corporations will do the right thing. We deserve enforceable protections backed by law. Consumers can protest, but regulation protects. Consumers can encourage responsibly, but regulations guarantees accountability. And when the future of our environment is at stake, guarantees matter far more than good intentions. You rest our case.
Thank you, Madam, for that presentation, that speech, to conclude what is an exciting and informative debate. I now turn over to Madam Aniki Clark for her to bring us to a close.
Sure. Thank you, Jermaine. It was indeed an interesting and informative debate. So let's give the teams another round of applause. For viewers online, are you for or against the arguments? Are you for or against the moods? Which team had the better arguments? The judges will decide, and I'm sure when Jermaine comes back, he will be able to sum up the match in his eloquent fashion and to announce the winner of today's battle between the Ministry of Economic Growth and Infrastructure Development, I got it right this time, and the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce, and they debated the moods. Be it resolved that regulating corporations is more effective than encouraging consumers to avoid companies with harmful environmental practices. Thank you so much. You've been a good audience. We take a break and return in about 20 minutes or so. Yes, it's done.
Welcome back, viewers, listeners, to the conclusion of this match that just went on. A match that saw two teams, one in proposition, Ministry of Economic Growth and Infrastructure. Infrastructure development. It does take a little while. Infrastructure development, MEG ID, and they went up against MEEC, that is Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce, right? And they were contesting, really questioning how should we treat with companies that violate and commit breaches of rules regarding the environment that would seem to deprive Jamaicans of our fundamental right to a healthy and a productive environment, yes? And so the proposition contends that regulations are what we should be pursuing to curtail the tendencies of these companies to abuse the environment. Of course, opposition contends that, that regulations are bad, and what we really should be doing is to pursue a path or a policy of encouraging the consumer to boycott, if you will, these companies. Now, something to note from the outset, the moot speaks about encouraging the consumers to boycott. We figure that throughout the debate, that whole process of encouraging the consumer was absent. That effectively this moot necessitated that both teams identify an actor that is conducting an action. And the actor in both instances is in, to some regard or the other, the government. So the government is either imposing regulations or the government is encouraging, the government is encouraging the citizen to boycott these companies. And so when we hear from team proposition that Jamaicans and citizens at large aren't that caught up with environmentalism and won't, the kind of antagonism against these companies won't persist for long enough because there's not an organic appreciation of environmental matters. That missed the point that it's the government that's going to be encouraging, right? It's not an organic process. And of course, a team opposition failed to appreciate that as well. Just something to point out from the outset. Now, what has transpired in the debate? Team proposition argues that the regulations are important because it establishes a standard approach. The government has mechanisms to go in and to interrogate what is happening within a company and understand what exactly has led to the environmental breach and hold the company to books, hold them accountable through mechanisms like the courts and so forth. Mechanisms that the individual citizen doesn't have access to. The individual citizen doesn't necessarily always appreciate the nuance of the environmental harm being orchestrated. Governments are better suited to do that. To which team opposition pushes back and says government is a bad actor insofar as governments are oftentimes the victims of lobby and manipulation by corporations. And it amounts to asking the fox to guard the chicken hen. The chicken coop or something to that effect, as opposition contends would be the case. Right? Now, we think that by and large, governments have a mechanism to hold companies accountable. The extent to which they will do so is possibly mediated by by some of the concerns from opposition, that ultimately, they won't necessarily be as robust and as stringent and as consistent in holding companies accountable on account of companies themselves corrupting that whole process and ultimately operating in a way that is inimical to the interest of the citizenry at large, right? On the question, though, of the legislation and legislative infrastructure as it exists, opposition contends that legislation is old and some of the penalties are really, really silly when you come to think of it. Penalties, $10,000, being imposed on a company for an environmental breach. It's really ridiculous, they contend, right? Now, we think that this is a true characterization of what obtains in the world as it relates to regulations just now. But it's one thing to point to singular deficits or lacunas in the legislation and say, well, yes, they exist as they are right now. Therefore, we should not use the legislation. Legislations can be improved upon, can be changed. And yes, while they are ineffective in some instances, as they are right now, that doesn't mean that the tool of legislation and regulations should be abandoned, we think. Team opposition, right? At the same time, team proposition responds not in that kind of way, which we think would have been probably a better kind of a way to respond, but they respond to say, well, legislation, because it's old, is not necessarily ineffective or inappropriate. That is true. Principally, legislation doesn't become ill-suited because it is aged, right? It becomes ill-suited because other factors have rendered it such. And so you are correct, team proposition, but I think that the response there needed a little bit more beefing up, and here is an opportunity for you to have presented maybe a bit of a layered response to the concern having to do with the effectiveness and the aged nature of legislation as presented by team opposition. Now, broadly speaking, which of the two mechanisms are more likely to lead to the results that both teams are aiming for, which is companies treating with respect and regard the environment? And we contend that that team ultimately wins the debate. The scores are as follows. We have winning team ending on 285 points. Yes, that's an impressive score. And that goes against the second place team's 274 points. Let me just confirm. Roshana, are those scores correct? Right, I have to be clear now. I'm on record. All right, 274 points as compared to 285 points. The winners of this match and the team that, should feel really, really elated on ending on such an impressive score, that's the team proposition. Meg ID. Right? So clearly, you know which mechanism works better in this debate. It's a mechanism of regulation. That definitely was a more impactful mechanism in this round compared to the mechanism of encouraging consumers to boycott companies. Okay, the best debater also comes to us from the winning team. And this is a bit of a split decision, but there was majority consensus on the panel that the best debater is, in fact, the second speaker from Team Ministry of Economic Growth and Infrastructure Development. All right, so we thank you very much, viewers, for tuning in and staying with us for what was a memorable and exciting match between these two agencies of the government. We look forward to you joining us back when next we meet in a short while from now for the third and final match of the day. Until then, take care.